not the most technologically advanced person, so we'll do the best we can. Okay, hello. My name is Twig George. I'm Jean Craighead George's daughter. And I'm so glad to see so many people here and hear so many people who have read the book and some who haven't. That's great. Uh, I thought we'd do this because recently I've gotten a lot of emails and letters and questions from grandparents and even from my mother's website. We get letters. And people were asking questions of my side of the mountain, wanted to know more about it. And it just seems like there's an uptick in interest. And I think it might be because, in these times, who wouldn't want to run away, live in a tree, and hunt with a falcon? And so I thought we could, discuss it and sort of see why it has meant to so many people for so long. She wrote it, and she said 3 weeks in 1958. It was published in 59, and it won the Newbery Honor in 60. And even though it's almost 70 years old, it still it still carries a message to people today. And I think I'll start with a little background on my mother, and then and her childhood, which influenced a lot of her writing. And then I kind of morph into how that childhood and her evolution affected her other books. And then we'll have time for questions at the end. So my side of the mountain, Jean Craighead George, she drew the map. She drew the map in just minutes. And she had this in her head for a long time. She had the stream and the swamp and the tree. And that became what a lot of people thought was a real map. And if you go to Delhi, New York, which is where it's set, around the library and around town, there's trails named Frightful Trails, and there's all kinds of things referring to my side of the mountain. I don't think anybody has found the tree, but you never know. So in 1988, she wrote the author's preface, and I think she was responding to the many, many questions she got of is Sam Gribley real? Is he there? Who is he? And it also tells a little bit about what she felt my side of the mountain meant to her. And so I'll read it to you. When I was in elementary school, I packed my suitcase and told my mother I was going to run away from home. As I envisioned it, I would live by a waterfall in the woods and catch fish on hooks made from the forks of tree limbs, as I had been taught by my father. I would walk among the wildflowers, flowers and trees, listen to the birds, read the weather report in the clouds and wind, and stride down the mountainsides, independent and free. There's no real Sam except inside me. His adventures are fulfillment of that day long ago when my mother told me when I told my mother I was going to run away. I got as far as the edge of the woods and came back. Perhaps Sam will fulfill your dreams too. Be you a writer or a reader, it is very pleasant to run away in a book. And I think this preface gave a lot of satisfaction to some people. But we did get some letters from some of her fans who were not so happy with that. And I found a whole folder of emails and letters that she had saved in the attic from a while ago. This was 1998 from a young fan. And what he wrote was, I first read My Side of the Mountain in 3rd grade. I read it every summer. By 6th grade, I had stopped believing in Sam was real. Up to that point, I was 100% sure he paid you off to put "There's no real Sam except inside me" in your preface so people wouldn't come looking for him. So that's what he believed for a long time. And then there was my student Blake. He was in 1st grade. I was reading My Side of the Mountain to them. We finished the chapter. They're about to go off to another activity. And he came up to me and very politely said, "Miss George," he says, "I know you think your mother wrote My Side of the Mountain, but really it was written by a 12-year-old boy named Sam Gribley." So Sam was very real to a lot of people, and he inspired a lot of people. So her early life, she grew up in Washington, D.C. She went to the Alice Steele Junior High, which was very simple back then, not fancy. She was, she was 14 at about that time, and they would go out, even though they lived in the city. My grandfather was a biologist and an entomologist, and he was really one of the best all-around biologists I've ever known, and people just loved to, be with him and learn from him. And so he would take the kids out every weekend and go up the Potomac when they were living in DC, and they would fish and they would make shelters and they would live off the land. And if you can see it, this is a bunch of fish that Mom caught. That's a pretty good haul. And I don't know if they did it on a homemade hook or not, but maybe. But then in the summer, they would go up to Craighead House on the Yellow Breeches River in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. It was the family home, and it was shared by two brothers and my grandfather and their whole families. Whoops. And an amazing group of people up in Carlisle took it over. It was beginning to fall apart, and they renovated it, and it now has a historic mark, designation. And it's really a beautiful house. I'm afraid it looks a lot better than maybe when most Craigheads lived there, but it's good. And the interesting thing, one of the interesting things was this sleeping porch back here. You can see that. That's where the boys slept on cots. And my mother had a room around in the back that had a little writing desk and looked out the window over the creek. And that's where she would sit and write, and evenings and mornings. And inside the house, this is the kitchen. Of course, it doesn't have any of the stoves and things that were there. They had 3 stoves for the 3 families. And my Uncle Jean, my grandfather's brother, would go around and test all the things that the different people were cooking and decide which group he was going to join for dinner. But one day it came out that, the place was looking kind of rough. With all those stoves, there was a lot of grease on the wall. So he told the kids that if they cleared a 6-foot square and washed it, they could draw on it. And they were all pretty good artists, actually. And so these are some of the drawings. There's more on the walls on other sides. And that began a tradition that kept right up through the 90s. All the cousins, all the friends would add their drawings to the walls. And luckily, the group that preserved the house also preserved the drawings. And it's there. It's a nature center. And it has programs and Zooms. So if you ever want to go up there, it's an interesting place to see where all these ideas came from. The Craighead ideas, which was her brothers and her father, they all wrote books and movies and all kinds of things based on nature and knew what they were talking about. So, and it was sort of idyllic. I mean, the boys would sleep on the porch, but they had, as always in my family, they had a lot of pets, and they sometimes come and land in the morning and say good morning, or in the evening before you went to bed. And this was Windy, the barred owl, and he stayed around. He would come in and get snacks, and stayed around for a couple of years. So these are, I'm going to read you in a kind of sequence, which I hope isn't too chopped up, from Mom's diaries that I found from the 1932 and 1933. She was born in 1919. So that means she was 13 or 14 years old when she wrote these. And on June 25th, which was the end of the school year, is when they would pack up from DC and drive up to Craighead House. Happy days are here again. All the skies are clear again. For summer's here. True enough, off we started for dear old Craighead with Mamu, the guinea pig, and her 4 tucked in a box on my lap, and all the owls and hawks in a special box, probably in the back. They were always traveling. They always had birds of prey and other animals and raccoons and foxes and crows and everything, blue jays, everything living in their in and out of their houses. So, of course, I went swimming, and when night fell, I was tucked in my little bed in the back room. The frogs croaked low, and the stream danced it on in the drowsiness of the night. How lovely everything looks, and how glad I am to be here. And you can feel that just the joy and the easiness of being in that place. So on July 5th, they were beginning to take pictures. They didn't have TV. They didn't have computers. They had a radio. But interestingly enough, my grandfather got them cameras, and they would go take pictures. And here's a picture of my mother, and you can see it. These are 2 sparrowhawks in her hair. And she had a pet sparrowhawk named Bad Boy. And you'll hear more about him in a minute. And she wrote, Catherine and I are crazy about taking pictures like Paula. Paula was her cousin and also an artist. All morning while we worked, and they worked. They did all the dishes. They did, they made cakes. They took care of a lot. We were full of inspirations. We could see the possibilities in every corner. So after our work was done, we went down in the meadows and took our pictures. And I'll show you in a minute what they took. So here is another entry, June 24th, June 25th. It pretty much logs what they did all day. They went swimming, they repaired a dam, they made a cake, they went to the meadows, they flew the birds. They did all kinds of things. And it was just was an amazingly busy group. And I'll read, this is the story of Bad Boy. That was her sparrowhawk, and this is one of the early mentions of him. Bad Boy, her sparrowhawk, flew to her hand. Bad Boy's first kill was that day. We went to the meadow, swam again, played a baseball, drove car with Dad, and then often went to friends' house for dancing to hear a band. Busy, busy. Bad Boy flew to my hand twice, and he loves his new home and surroundings, and so do I. And on again, when he made his first kill, he wrote, he hit the sparrow like a bullet, and he flew off to hide it so no one could see him eat. His little feathers were all fluffed up, and he screamed if you came near. He also flew to my hand 7 times. Oh, there. And this is the actual book that I also found up in the boxes and boxes of things up in her attic. Here's the cover, Bad Boy, which is the name of the book, and her little sparrowhawk. And she wrote on July 18, 1933, anxious to finish my story, I wandered off into the meadows, and soon after the dishes were done, I wrote the last chapter. I copied it before lunch, after which I went out and got the last 3 sketches of Bad Boy. I feel good now that it's finished. After supper, we went with the Boiling Springs band while they played. We sure had fun. So she wrote this at 14. And this was the actual picture that she mentioned in the previous slide. And her narrative writing this time evolved from her diaries and her personal experiences. And that continued through her whole life. And this is her book. So it was finally finished in December of 1933. Jean Craighead, age 14. Ay, ay, ay. Oop. Go back. It's going all over there. So this was dedicated to my little sparrowhawk, Jean Craighead George. And it says, I hear you calling me right now. It all comes back so clear. And then the days you fly away, and now and how I hunt for you. Tired and hot, I wander home to find that you had too. And Bubo, remember Bubo? The night that he came home. And that's just a mention at the end. But later, one of the first books she wrote was Bubo, the Great Horned Owl. And she wrote it with my father's in the early 50s. So in her family, she had two brothers who were really something else. And they were bright and busy. They brought the, they sort of revolutionized the idea of falconry in the United States, among other groups that were doing it. But they got a lot of press about it. They even went invited to India by the Maharaja to see how they did. They did their falconry, and while it's definitely reflected in My Side of the Mountain, it's also a book called The Summer of the Falcon that Mom wrote. And it's interesting that in life, Mom had a little sparrowhawk. In My Side of the Mountain, Sam had a peregrine falcon. So I think she finally got her falcon. And this, if I can get it to work, is some pretty rare footage that Charlie, my cousin, sent to me. I don't think many people have seen it. This is the boys and their friends with their falcons at Craighead House, probably in 1933, 34, 32. And you can see there was a whole group of them. They trained them. They taught them to hunt. Here's one taking its food, reaching out, to coming to his hand. And, you know, this would go on all day, and it became a big part of their lives, and also hers and all of their friends. And so they would spend their lives with, their days with the falcons, taking pictures, writing books, swimming, building dams, making cakes, cleaning, and doing all the things that they had to work. But they always found time to spend in the woods, the streams, the meadows, and sometimes they would make shelters, which also, this is a drawing from My Side of the Mountain. A couple of good shelters. Make sure your fire is on scraped earth. Also be sure to put it out. They had little warnings in there. I can hear my grandfather there. He was a really wonderful guy, but he had his, he kept them safe and knowing what worked and what didn't. This is the water hole that they would dam up and swim in every year. This is where boys could wear very, easy trunks or whatever. The girls had to wear these really awful black wool swimsuits. My cousin Lori, whose family lived in the house for many years, we went up to the attic and we got these wool swimsuits. They had long, they were like shorts, and these straps that came over, and they were awful. They were scratchy, and when they got wet, they were like woolly, but it's still, I'm sure it didn't stop them from loving everything that they were doing. And so all of her experience became part of My Side of the Mountain. She had lived My Side of the Mountain. She and her brothers would go out with my grandfather. He'd test them on, spice goes, what's this? So they knew all their plants. They knew what they could eat. They knew what they couldn't eat. They learned to fly falcons. They learned to make fish hooks and fires and everything they needed. And sometimes, this is another drawing from my side of the mountain, and sometimes the connection is pretty close. This is my uncle, I don't know if it's John or Frank, they look very much alike, and that looks to me like an eagle, but we'll take that. And and also there were other times that they were up there. They would go up to different seasons, and there's a chapter in the My Side of the Mountain book during the winter where the ice comes, and it's pretty intense. And this is a picture of Craighead House, the stream in the Yellow Breeches after an ice storm. And this is what she wrote in the, yikes. This is what she wrote in the My Side of the Mountain on page 139. I came out and took a step. I landed like an explosion on my seat. The jolt sent glass-covered limbs clattering to the earth like a shop full of shattering glass. My Side of the Mountain, page 139. And again, it goes back to her experience and the things that she remembered. And I think it's what makes her writing so good is because she did it, she lived it, she felt it. She wasn't faking it, you know. It's held its truth for a long time. So growing up, they grew up with a lot of animals. We continue to do the same, as did our cousins and our second cousins, as I mentioned. This is Nod. This was Mom's first pet. It was a vulture, and it sat on top of the kitchen door. Finally, my grandmother had it. She said, I can't have him watching me cook all the time. So they moved him out to a perch outside. And each of these animals, yikes. Each of these animals led to something, you know, led to one of her books. So we had 5 crows. And I'm not sure which crows are which exactly. They know us, but we didn't know them as well. But we had one crow named Crowbar. And it was during a time when scientists said that the only people who could use tools, the only animals that could use tools were humans, and then no animals could. And so we had Crowbar. And Crowbar one day came out while I was building a sandcastle and had taken one of my mother's silver spoons for a flag and put it in the top of the castle. And he came down, and they love shiny things. And he took the silver spoon and he put it up in a tree 50 feet off the ground. And I was like, uh-oh, this is not good. So I went in to try to preempt the problem. And I said, Mom, crow's stealing my toys. I said, yeah, you know, this isn't good. And she said, well, why don't you go slide down the slide? Because crows can't slide down the slide. The feet don't slide. They'll grab on with their back claw and, you know, give them a rest for a while. So we went over to the slide, we zoomed down the slide, and then the crow flew over, Crowbar, and stood on the top of the slide. And he went like this, and he couldn't go. And then he flew off, and we all said, well, it worked. And 5 minutes later, he flies back with a coffee can lid in his beak. And he puts the coffee can lid on top of the slide, stands on it, down the slide. Is that using a tool? That's using a tool. And, you know, unfortunately, at the time, she would have been run out of the, you know, mill if she had written that in a book. She often got criticism anyway, but so she saved that story, and she saved them up, and she finally wrote a book called Cry of a Crow. And then we finished one that she sketched out later. It was a picture book called Crowbar, smartest book in the world, the smartest crow in the world. And, you know, there's so much great information now about crows. So we'll talk about that another time. But then we also all had our favorites. We had different animals, and my favorite of all time was Yammer. Yammer was a screech owl that came to live with us. He would roost every night on top of my door, which isn't so different from roosting in a tree. It made sense. But then a lot of these very bright creatures would pick up on human luxuries that, were not so bad. So in the morning, he would fly into the bathroom, and when I was taking a shower, he would land on my shoulder. And when that warm water came down, he would put his little head under, and he would put his little wing under, and the other one under, until he was totally soaking wet. And after the shower, you had to kind of take him off your shoulder, shake him off, and put him up on top of the bar of the shower so he could fluff himself up and squeegee his wings. Only took a couple of minutes, and then he was good to go. Well, that worked great until one time we had some visitors, and they were coming in late. And Mom said, "Tomorrow morning, kids, you need to go downstairs, get your cereal, go outside. I don't care. Just don't wake up the guests coming in late." So we said, okay. So I corral my brothers downstairs. We're sitting at the table. We didn't spill anything. We're eating our cereal. No fights. I mean, things were really good. When all of a sudden we heard the guest room door open. And we thought, uh-oh. But then we thought, if the guest wants to get up, can the guest get up? You don't have to stay in bed. So we went back to eating our cereal. And we heard somebody walk down the hall, and we heard the shower go on. And then about 30 seconds later, we heard, ah! And sure enough, the owl had landed on our friend's shoulder, and he had jumped out, and the owl had landed unceremoniously in the bottom of the shower, was stomping around with his little feet and his little tops turning into two spears and a little skinny body. And the friend thought it was something that had crawled out of the drain and attacked him. So we had to calm down our friend. We had to pick up the owl. We had to give him a little shake, put him on top of the thing of the shower rod. And then we ran downstairs and got a board and wrote in crayon, "Please remove owl after showering," and hung it up over the shower head. Now, I don't remember us having many friends showering after that, but otherwise it worked, I guess. And then there was Baron Weasel, or what became Baron Weasel in my side of the mountain. We had a weasel. He was the most unfriendly pet we had. And we used to have to sit on top of the car when Dad fed it. And so one day I was there sitting on top of the car watching that, and I kind of slid off. It was those old 1950 round cars, and I slid off the top front of the car. And the weasel saw me, and he took off after me. And I had to run across the yard to the swing, and I jumped up on the swing, and then the weasel jumped up, and then I had to shinny up the rope, and the weasel shinnied up the rope. And finally I got to the top where the metal bar was, and I went hand over hand on the metal bar, and he couldn't do that. And that gave Dad time to get him and get him back in the cage. So that was in 1959. That was before my side of the mountain. So I think a lot of his personality became part of Baron Weasel in the story. And it was interesting, looking at it as a grown-up over the time of Mom's books. I thought it seemed like my side of the mountain was really a transitional book, marking the time when she began to explore and understand animals as social, emotional creatures. Like her early books, Volpes, Bulbo, Dr. Dipper of Copper Creek, they were all, she came from a hunting culture, animals were not as personified as and seen as full range creatures as some of her later books. And this is Hole in the Tree. You can see this is a story. She could find stories anywhere. We used to look in a hole in this tree every day, and she turned it into a story. And this is a bluebird that she drew that lived on the tree. Just, I think, a really beautiful drawing. Also, here is an illustration from from Bubo, and as you remember, maybe Bubo was in that story of Bad Boy and Sparrowhawk, and you can see him flying over what is farmland, a little house, a railroad bridge, which is where Mom would go. She'd sneak out at night and she'd go to the railroad bridge on moonlit nights, full moon, and she'd write in her diary and her notebooks because she thought that's what writers did. And then going through her stuff, I found these papers called Science is Stories, not dated, but she is using a computer, so it must not have been too early. But she writes, this is so perfect because it really sums up all her writing. Such marvelous material from today's biological research is the basis for my books for children. But research is not enough to catch a daydreaming mind. I insist they listen by telling a story. My protagonists are children, or birds, or beasts. Occasionally an environment becomes the hero, as in One Day in the Desert, Alpine Tundra, Prairie, and Woods series. I call this writing style narrative nonfiction. I know of no child who does not love a story and who will not stick with you through biology, ecology, even physics and chemistry if a narrative holds the facts together. When someone accused me of making candy of science by using the narrative form, I answered, I do so because scientific research is in itself a story. That's right. I write the first draft quickly and flesh it out with anything of more interest that I can pick up in scientific literature, and then I become a nature writer. Nature writing is an aesthetic and poetic appreciation of nature with a scientific point of view. The plants must bloom at the right time of year. The tides must be on cue. The feathers of a bird must molt in the correct month. There is no excuse today to give children misinformation. In fact, it is our duty as science writers not to perpetuate myths. A phone call to an expert can make the difference. After this work comes the poetry. Now I try to infuse the story with my love and enthusiasm for children, animals, and landscapes. I rewrite 3, 4, 5 times, check the information again, rewrite once more. She used to say, if you want to write for kids, write for adults, and then write it over 5 times. So she didn't like to talk down to kids. On this final trip to the word processor, I close my eyes and recreate in my imagination the land, the people, and the animals I am writing about. I open them in my eyes, and as I write, I strive to put the reader on scene. I want to make each child feel that he is under the hemlock tree with Sam Gribley on my side of the mountain, or on his hands and knees talking to the tundra wolves and Julie of the Wolf. I want my reader to hear and see the ice on the Arctic Ocean and water sky. And if I do that, I believe then the children will find nature as exciting as I do. And I love this. And to be excited by data is to learn. That's wonderful. And then, so she evolved from, let's see what the next one is. Is this really here? Figure out this story. Okay. Yeah. So after a while, it was in the 70s, she read books by David Meach, and he was a scientist studying the wolves, wrote many articles, and then wrote the book, The Wolf, Ecology and Behavior of Endangered Species. And it opened a whole new world to her. Here was the social and emotional world of the wolves and their interactions and how they cared for each other. There were babysitters, there were lookouts. It was just incredible. And so she contacted the Reader's Digest that she wrote a lot for and said, I want to write this story. I'm going up to Alaska and I'm going to meet with David Meach also, and I'm going to write this story. And so when she came back, she wrote this article that she loved. And when she turned it in, she was devastated to find out that they were not going to accept it. And I'm not too sure why. A little later, they took an article by David Meach, but she was devastated. I'm really devastated, which did not happen often with her. And she called me. I was at college. And she said, you know, not taking the story. I love the story. And so I just said what was I thought was obvious, which was, well, write a book. And she just stopped. And then she said, I will. And she did. And I'm sure I was not the only person that said that. I'm sure there were editors and friends and scientists that said the same thing. But it became Julie of the Wolf. And she went up to Alaska and met a group of wolves that were in captivity, but the female had cubs. And she spent days, you know, observing the female. And finally, the female came up and looked her right in the eye. And Mom felt that she had a connection and that there could be a connection between humans and wolves. And that was the beginning of Julie of the Wolves, where she had a young girl, you know, forced out into the tundra, and to survive, she had to live with the wolves. And so this was sort of the full circle of, you know, from conservation and, you know, using animals for food and, you know, things like that, to really understanding and living with them and you know, being one with them. And so after that, she had My Side of the Mountain. We wrote a pocket guide to the outdoors, which we'll talk about later because it might be part of our activity next week. Julie of the Wolves, this book, Wolves Are Back, is unbelievable. You got to get this. If you have any interest in like what happens when a predator comes back into an area. Most people think it's a predator, it's going to kill things, there's going to be less things. This really goes into what happens when the wolves push the bison and the elk up into the mountains. The streams aren't trampled anymore. The grasses and the plants come back, the birds come back. It's an abundance. It creates more. And it's just beautifully done, simple and great. And then, you know, Crowbar is another story of that wonderful crow. Ice Whale is my brother's story about his bowhead whales. Galapagos George, who lived 100 years and just died 2 weeks after Mom. And then her final book that she wrote when she was alive was Shadow. She wrote it with my cousin Charlie. And it's a story about humans and a wild cougar. And the introduction that Jane Goodall wrote reminds us the lesson Jean makes is that for humans and wild cougars to coexist, we need to leave them alone. Jean finished working on the book with my cousin, Charlie, 4 days before she died. And that's the way she wanted it. It was a culmination, a coming full circle of her understanding and oneness with the natural world and animals. And it's really just a beautiful book if you can find it. So I want to thank the Natural History Society of Maryland, because as everybody was writing Mom to find out what, you know, Sam Gribley was real, they wanted to know what they had to know to go out and live like Sam Gribley. The Natural History Society of Maryland is where you can go to find out. There are experts in every field, you know, edible wild plants, fossils, they're wonderful canoe trips. It is just a gem, and it's so good. Everybody's so good. You get to work with the people that are really doing the science. And for kids, I can't think of anything better. And another place is the Craighead House in Boiling Springs or Carlisle, Pennsylvania. It's it's fun to go up there. They have lots of programs. It's a great place. And they redid the house so you can see what it would be like to live there. And and the other thing that's interesting, it's not a big house. It's not a fancy thing. I don't 10 billion acres in the middle of it's a small area but it provided so much richness for those kids and those families there. And it reminds me that, you know, there's always something to find. There's always things to study. We don't have to go, though we like to go to national parks, but it's not 100% necessary. You can go to the Natural History Society and learn mosses with Linda, or fossils with Adrian, or edible plants with Nick, and you're gonna get yourself a good education. And then finally, I want to thank my friends Mike Yates and Bill Seagrove for their 50-year study of peregrines on Assateague Island. Thank you for including me. They included me for about 20 years, and it was just a joy to be with those beautiful birds and a beautiful place, and it, with the wind blowing and the sea rushing in and out, and I can't thank them enough. So next week, I thought what we could do, because everybody wants to do this usually, we could look at some of Sam's activities, and I'll show how to share how to make one safe wild foods meal that Nick Spiros has helped me with, and he may be on the program, I'm not sure. And also perhaps how to make a fish hook, or how not to make a fish hook, which kind of happened. But so if you would like to send a picture of your activity that you can send a picture by email ahead of time to NHSM at marylandnature.com. Put my side in the subject and include your first name and age if you like. And to get it here in time for the program next week, it has to be received by 3 p.m. on July 14th. And then for the final week, these are the resources. So, of course, there's a pocket guide to the outdoor based on My Side of the Mountain, which has a little more detail on some of the activities, and also done with me and my brothers. How to Survive on Land and Sea by Frank and Jean Craighead. They did this for the Army during the war, and it's really a Bible of how to, survival and ancestral techniques that you can use to keep yourself alive. And then there's also books like the Primitive Technology and Ancestral Skills from the Society of Primitive Technology, and other books like that. You can go to your library. Mom loved libraries. She loved finding the right book at the library. And I'm sure if you need help, you can find the answer there, or of course now on the internet. So the final Zoom on July 22nd, I thought would be reflections, your favorite thoughts, your favorite quote. Send again an email to nsham@marylandnature.com, put my side in the subject, include your first name and age if you like, and that must be received by 3 p.m. on July 21st, the day before. And I even have some manuscripts, original manuscripts that the Curling Collection in Minnesota gave me to share with you, which shows Mom's changes and the things that she changed in her in My Side of the Mountain, and how she went about kind of editing it. And it's really interesting, I think. And if it's not, then we'll move on to something else. So I think it's time to go back to Bronwyn and open it up for questions. I hope we have time. Did I talk to you?
Thank you so much, Twig. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You can unshare. Let me put a spotlight on you now.
Ooh.
Let me figure out how to do that real quick. All right, now the spotlight is on Twig. Woo! We learned so much. That was a fascinating journey, and really brought your mom to life. And she is Sam.
She is Sam.
She is Sam.
She's a great story in herself, but she is Sam. That's true.
Yeah, that was great. Let me look at the chat box. There's already some questions here. If you have a question you'd like to ask, you can put it in the chat box or raise your hand and I'll call on you and you can unmute. Let's see. Oh, Sarah knows about the plants. Sam talked about thanks to the foraging classes that we
Yeah.
give at Natural History Society. So that's great. Justine wants to know, did Jean really have a tarantula in her purse?
Yes, and going back to the plants, it's really
Okay.
great to go someplace like the Natural History Society programs to learn your plants, because different, a plant can be great at one time of the year, not so great at another time of the year. It can look like one thing and be another. So really know your plants. Don't try anything unless you're sure. And if not, find somebody who can tell you. Okay.
Well, Twig, did your family, were they foragers? Did they go out and forage plants in the
Yeah.
wild?
They made us, well, we ate a lot of very strange things. Some were experimental. We found out that, and actually Nick Spiros told me that the cattail tubers that we ate and mashed really irritated our throats. And we thought that that was a general thing, and maybe we didn't do it right. But it turns out that some people are very sensitive to it. And Nick Spiro said it's only happened in his experience a couple times. But it's that kind of thing that you need to know about when you're trying wild foods. Just try a little bit first, don't jump into it, just because it's natural doesn't mean it's not a little bit, maybe not be good for you.
So Linda asked, when did you have any idea how much was in your mom's attic?
No. Oh my gosh. No. It was, there were tons of things. There were like 4-foot boxes, 4 feet long, of papers and rewrites and manuscripts and old diaries and pictures and illustrations, 700 illustrations. I mean, where was it our whole life? I don't know. She's had it in little places all over the attic. And I am still going through it today. And she passed away in 2012. So, but it's really cool stuff. That's the trouble. You can't just throw it out.
I personally loved her journals. Is there any
Yeah.
is there any effort to get those published?
Yeah. Again, we had to get through them. She had a whole box, like about 20 of them. And it's a matter of taking the time, go through and putting them into a form.
Cindy asks, how did your parents meet?
How did they meet? Well, my father was the roommate of my mother's uncles, my mother's brothers. And so they introduced him to Mom. And they really hit it off. They fell madly in love. And then they lived in that tent in Michigan year round for 4 years. And then I was born at the end of the 4 years. And Mom always said that was her happiest time, that she just loved it. And they eventually got divorced, but they had some very good times.
Malachi asked, did you have a favorite childhood pet?
Oh, the Yammer, the owl. He was so wonderful. He was, he would follow me around. He got in the shower and he'd beat up my door at night. And he was just a love. That was one of my favorites. But sometimes I didn't tell this story. We had 3 raccoons and 4 baby skunks at the same time. And the baby skunks, I don't know if this is true, or this seemed true. Couldn't see very well. So when you came home at night, you had to call their names and stamp your feet and use your voices until you hear them scurrying around on the other side of the door. because we didn't descent them because our goal is always to release them back into the wild. And so then we'd come down and we'd open the door and things would be pretty good. But we also had 3 raccoons. And one night we came home and we looked in the living room and it was like it had snowed. There was like this white powder everywhere. And we followed the footprints into the kitchen. And the raccoons had used those wonderful little hands and they had opened all the childproof locks on the cabinets. And the cabinets were filled with sugar and flour and cornflakes and, Christmas candy and all this stuff, raisins. And they got into them all and they were all over the place. And the skunks must have gotten into them. I mean, the dust was still in the air when we got in there. And then we looked in the middle of the room and the biggest, fattest raccoon that we had was sitting in the big sugar bin, which was about this big and about this deep. And he had his legs over one side and his arms over the other side and this huge belly with this look on his face like, oh. Eat sugar again after that. So, you never knew what would happen with these critters.
Monica says it's wonderful, and I agree. See all those photos and hear the memories. And she said that it seems to echo Thoreau Walden. And did your mom have an affinity with Thoreau?
Yes, she did. And it has a lot of parallels with Walden. Yeah. And that was very important to her.
So if you'd like to, if anybody would like to ask a question, put it in the chat box, or you can raise your hand using the icon and I can call on you. And ask Twig a question. Yep. And if you think of any questions that you have, thank you, Katie, after the Zoom, bring them to the next one. We have 2 more Zooms to get deep into the weeds with Sam and Twig and Jean and my side of the mountain. We'll go more into how Sam survived on the mountain and see, we'd love for you to try some of the activities out yourself and share those with us.
It's okay if it isn't perfect. It's okay because that's a learning process. My fish hook is a learning process.
Twig's learning how to make us fish hook. I think that you got with Nick to do the meal, so we'll see that.
And we'll see that. That was great. Oh, wonderful. Milkweed flowers, cattail stalks, and daylilies. Ah, it was wonderful. I mean, you would want it anytime.
All right. Well, if there's no more questions, this was wonderful. It is recorded, so we'll be putting it up on our Facebook page. And just a quick note, it's marylandnature.org, not com. So if you want to send in your pictures, your comments, your anything to be shared at one of the next 2 Zoom meetings, just do that. It's marylandnature.org. And put that in, and that's where you can go and also buy the raffle tickets. Since I got so engrossed in Twig's presentation, I forgot to put the link in there, but it's easy to find on marylandnature.org. And I hope to see y'all back here next Tuesday as we continue with our Sam Gribley fan club, with our president, Twig George. Thank you, Twig, for sharing all of that wonderful, giving us an inside peek to your mom, your family, and my side of the mountain.
Wow.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. See you soon.
Thanks, Twig.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.